And joining us now, trial attorney and legal analyst Misty Maris. Misty, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you help us put this into perspective? How significant is today and these 6 motions that we're looking at? What kind of impact could we be seeing on the case from today?
Absolutely. So all of these motions are really critical to the case, and they all have different levels of relevancy to how this case proceeds. So we have 2 motions from the defense, one relating to the DNA evidence and whether or not the defense is going to be able to get all of the underlying information that led to prosecutors' conclusions. Not an unusual motion from an evidentiary perspective. Something defense attorneys often challenge in court is the means and manner of collection of evidence and the methodology to get to whatever result they're presenting to the court. So that's a typical motion. Whether or not the defense gets that underlying information is going to largely depend on the circumstances and what comes out in the courtroom. The second one, will the trial be delayed because defense is saying that there were issues with the grand jury proceeding and that there's bias with the grand jurors who were seated and therefore that indictment should be questioned. That could delay this trial significantly. Prosecutors came out and said, this is just an expedition to wrongfully delay the trial. The legal arguments out there. Then we have some significant prosecution motions. The most significant to me, Natasha, is the motion relating to Kohberger's alibi. New information that came out, something people don't know. If an alibi defense is going to be raised, there has to be a filing in advance of the trial. Now prosecutors pressing Kohberger for more specific information about that alibi. That could really turn this case on its head, depending on what information comes out. So all of these really relevant to what happens in that courtroom when the trial actually is underway.
So does Kohberger's defense have to reveal their alibi today, basically, in order to bring it forward later? Or what are you tracking in terms of an alibi?
So they don't necessarily have to identify that particular person to the extent that there was a very rock solid alibi. Think about it. I was on vacation that day. You can talk to this restaurant that I was at in Italy on that day or in California. I wasn't in Idaho. I have people who can attest to that. I have some pretty clear objective evidence. Well, that, Natasha, would be a means to get this case dismissed because there is this solid alibi. In this case, it is much more foggy. And that, to me, signals, at least from what we know right now, to the extent that nothing new comes out in the courtroom, that the judge will likely find that Kohberger can present that as a theory of the case at trial, but that it will be up to the jury to decide whether or not that is a credible argument. So do they have to reveal it right now? No. Could it be helpful if there was something rock solid? Yes. Is it always like that? No. It might be more complicated and something that will have to be furthered at that trial. And Natasha, this loops in with the DNA. Keep in mind something defense is asking for. Were there any other matches? That signals to me an alternate theory of the case defense. Wasn't him. It was somebody else.
Okay, I want to talk about DNA in just a moment, but can we just stick with the alibi for one more second here? I mean, let's say they do find an alibi who says, oh, he was somewhere else that day. We have these cell phone pings around this area around the time of the crime. How do those 2 things jive with one another, Misty?
It's a great question, and that's why the judge is the person who makes a determination about questions of law. Jurors determine questions of fact, meaning that they see the evidence from both sides and they make a determination about credibility. So those cell phone pings, excellent evidence, especially in corresponding with everything else. But you'll see the defense come forward likely at the time of trial with, you know what, cell phone pings aren't dispositive. I might be standing in my very location here in New York, but I might ping 20 miles down the road. So it doesn't necessarily put you specifically in a very finite location. There's ways to undercut that evidence. So all of that is going to be part of a larger narrative, and then a jury decides whether or not they believe the prosecution's narrative or the defense narrative, depending on the evidence that comes out.
Yeah, and very last question, how easy will it be for the defense to undercut the DNA evidence? Because we are seeing that they will be looking to potentially cast doubt on something that does seem very cut and dry to the layperson.
DNA evidence always has the defenses built in. And in this particular situation, we're talking about mitochondrial DNA. Sounds like a very complicated term, but basically it's DNA based on genealogy. So that's different than the regular DNA that we see play out in most cases, called nuclear DNA. That's when you get a swab of somebody's saliva and you match it directly to something else. This DNA tracks your genealogy as a person and who you're related to, and makes a determination about the likelihood that DNA found at the scene is connected to you. So there are different defenses at play.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.